Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lahu wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. Amma ba'du fa'uzu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. قال الله تعالى في القرآن الحكيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم فتقبلها ربها بقبول حسن وأنبتها نباتا حسنا وكفلها زكريا كلما دخل عليها زكريا المحراب وجد عندها رزقا قال يا مريم أنى لك هذا قالت هو من عند الله إن الله يرزق من يشاء بغير حساب هنالك دعا زكريا ربه قال رب هب لي من لدنك ذرية طيبة إنك سميع الدعاء صدق الله العظيم. I'm continuing with the subject covered in last Friday's khutbah, and I had reached the point at which Mary was born and her mother felt the disappointment that she, that is to say the mother, would not be able to fulfill her vow which she had made earlier to God, that she would devote the child to the service of the temple. She would be unable to fulfill this vow since the child was not a male. And the verses which I have read translate as follows. So her Lord accepted her with a goodly acceptance, that is to say Mary, and made her grow up a goodly growing, and gave her into the charge of Zacharias or Zechariah. Whenever Zacharias entered the sanctuary to see her, he found food with her. He said, Mary, from where does this come to you, this food? She said, it is from Allah. Surely Allah gives to whom He pleases without measure. Then did Zacharias pray to his Lord. He said, my Lord, grant me from yourself goodly offspring. Surely you are the hearer of prayer. And this is chapter 3, Surah Al Imran, verses 37 and 38. So nonetheless, Mary's mother prayed that Mary and her offspring, any offspring that she may have, that they receive God's protection from being misled by the devil, Shaitanir Rajim. And the Holy Quran then tells us, as I've just recited, that Mary was accepted by God, and Allah decreed for her a good upbringing. So here we see again that a baby girl is accepted by Allah Himself without any reservation and with the fullest acceptance. Unfortunately, in our Muslim societies and also in non-Muslim societies in many countries such as India and China, human beings don't accept the birth of a girl as a good thing. But here you see Allah accepted the birth of a girl as a good thing. Now Mary's mother gave Mary into the charge of Zacharias, as it says here, gave her into the charge of Zacharias, who was one of the temple priests. And this was for a religious upbringing in the temple. Obviously, this was not done as soon as Mary was born, but when she reached a young age at which she could receive religious instruction. It also appears that Zechariah's wife was Mary's aunt. She was Mary's khala, or her mother's sister, it is said. And her name is given in the Gospels as Elizabeth. So Mary was really in the charge of her, as we say in Urdu, khalu and khala. And according to the Gospel of Luke, it says about Zacharias and his wife Elizabeth that they were both righteous before God, walking in all the commandments and ordinances of the Lord, blameless. This is in the Christian Gospels, the Gospel of Luke. And there is a point here to ponder for our Christian friends, with due respect to them. This was before the birth of Jesus, that there was a Jewish priest and his wife, Zacharias and Elizabeth, who, according to Christian scriptures, were perfectly obedient to God in a blameless way, committing no sin. And this contradicts this notion that before the coming of Jesus, everyone was a sinner and people only became free of sin through Jesus after coming to believe in him. And the Holy Quran confirms this also about Zacharias and his wife. It contains a brief statement in another chapter about Zacharias and his wife. And that statement in the Holy Quran is this: surely they used to hasten in doing good deeds, be quick in doing good deeds, and they called upon us, hoping and fearing, and they were humble before us. Us here is Allah. So this is chapter 21, verse 90. And this verse also shows us that religion is not just a man's world, but that husband and wife together, as stated in this verse, or men and women both, taking it more generally, they are all required to act on the teachings of the religion, to do good deeds, pray to God with hope, fear, and humility. Then the Holy Quran says in this story that, as I recited those verses, whenever Zacharias entered the sanctuary, this holy place in the temple where Mary was, to see her, he found food with her, and he asked her, where does it come from? And Mary replied, it is from Allah. Surely Allah gives to whom he pleases without measure, بغير hisab. From this statement, many Muslims have made up all kinds of stories and fables. For example, they say that food used to appear in Mary's room miraculously, and it had out-of-season fruits in it as well, not available anywhere. But what Mary is saying, it is from Allah, is just an expression of thanks to God. Now, very frequently we hear someone say about something which they possess, something they've received, that this is from Allah. And they mean that it's not just the result of their own efforts. It is from Allah. It never means that that thing came to them in a supernatural way and just appeared out of nowhere. Now, also, I would like to say that Maulana Muhammad Ali, in his Urdu commentary of the Quran, Bayan al-Quran, has asked this question. He asks, if this coming of food to Mary was an ordinary event, in other words, people bringing her food, and not any kind of miracle, why does the Quran mention it? And he gives the answer himself that there is a lesson in Muslims. There is a lesson for Muslims in this. That lesson is that when someone devotes his life or her life for the service of Islam, that person naturally has an anxiety about what will be their means of earning and where will his livelihood come from. And here Allah indicates that He Himself makes provision for the worldly sustenance of such a person. So we can take this verse, it is from Allah, as meaning that people, seeing that Mary was devoting herself to religious work and was a righteous person, were bringing her food and provisions. Another interpretation is that the food mentioned here, called rizq, it's called rizq in that verse of the Holy Quran, that it is not any physical means of sustenance, but it stands for knowledge and spiritual development. In other words, food for the mind and spirit. And what is meant is that whenever Zechariah saw Mary to check on her progress in the temple, he found her to have acquired more knowledge and to have developed further in moral and spiritual terms. And this was not through any human teaching, through any human being teaching her, but by God bestowing this knowledge on her. Because you see, a few verses later, we read this in the Holy Quran about Mary. And when the angel said, "O Mary, surely Allah has chosen you and purified you and chosen you above the women of the world." This is verse 42 of chapter 3. So this was the rizq or sustenance that came to her from Allah. It was her purification and her being chosen by Allah. Now, as regards Mary's reply, which I've quoted already, it is from Allah. Surely Allah gives to whom He pleases without measure, بغير hisab. Now, whatever thing a person needs physically, whether it is food or something else, that always has a limit. No one needs an unlimited amount of food or sustenance, بغير hisab. But as regards moral progress and knowledge, there is no limit to that which we can acquire. So whenever Allah promises to give us something بغير hisab, without measure, it really refers to things to which there is no limit on how much you can get, or also things which simply cannot be measured. Now, in worldly terms, in this world, the progress you make in a job and you rise to a higher position, all that can be measured and also counted in terms of salary. But a piece of knowledge which you acquire, or some good deed that you do, that you learn to do, that cannot be measured by any number, in any numerical way. And in another place in the Holy Quran, it says that, this is in Surah Nur, chapter 24, that the light of Allah, the Nur of Allah, can be found in those houses where the residents of those houses keep up prayer and give in charity and do not let the earning of worldly wealth divert them from doing these duties. And it goes on to say in that chapter that for such people, Allah may give them the best reward for what they did and give them more out of His grace. And Allah provides without measure, بغیر حساب, provides without measure for whom He pleases. Chapter 24, verse 38. So what Allah is providing to these people without measure is the reward or result of their good deeds. And unlike worldly wealth or a bank account, the value of this reward cannot be measured on any scale. And as it cannot be measured, it means that there is no limit on how much we can get of it. Now, turning back to that story of Mary and Zacharias, when Zacharias heard this reply from Mary, it is from Allah. He gives to whom He pleases without measure. Zacharias was deeply impressed. So as I quoted before, the Holy Quran then says, then did Zacharias pray to his Lord. He said, my Lord, grant me from yourself goodly offspring, and you are the hearer of prayer. Now Zacharias and his wife, as the Holy Quran tells us, and it is also in the Bible, in the Gospels, Zacharias and his wife were old and childless. They had no children. Yet Zacharias is so impressed by Maryam's character that he prays to Allah to be granted a child like Mary. Now, before going further, I would like to point out something which strikes me here. We hear so much about priests of various religions who are beating, maltreating, and even sexually abusing children who are under their care in various institutions and religious schools. This is in the news from time to time. But here in the Holy Quran, we have the best example of how those who are under care of religious instructors and teachers, how they should be treated. Firstly, Zacharias checks on Mary's welfare and he asks her, where is this food coming from? So he's concerned about her welfare. Secondly, Zacharias, who is the teacher, is so impressed with the progress of his pupil Mary, that he prays to be granted such a child himself. And the Holy Quran then says about Zacharias that the angels called to him as he stood praying and said to him, the angel said, Allah gives you the good news of Yahya. This Yahya is called John the Baptist in the Gospels. Good news of Yahya, who will verify the word of Allah and will be honorable and chaste and a prophet from among the good ones. Verse 39 of chapter 3. This name Yahya means someone who would have life. And here life means that he would have spiritual life. And it was such a great son who was promised to Zacharias by Allah. And this prophet Yahya, who, as I've said, is known in the Gospels as John the Baptist, he started his preaching just as Jesus was growing up, before Jesus had started his mission. And Yahya declared to people the coming of Jesus, and that he himself was preparing the way for the coming of Jesus. And so it is interesting to note that if you look at the beginning of the Jewish or Israelite religion, there were two prophets at the same time, Moses and Aaron, whom we call Musa alayhi salam and Harun alayhi salam. One of them was the other's helper. So that was at the beginning of the Jewish religion or Jewish prophethood. And at the end of the prophethood among the Bani Israel, again there were two prophets at the same time, one helping the other, called in English John and Jesus, and in Arabic Yahya and Isa. Anyhow, it appears that this John the Baptist, or Yahya, was arrested and executed by the Jewish king of his time. And there is even a famous play about this by George Bernard Shaw called Salome, which I once went to see, about the execution of Yahya or John the Baptist. Anyhow, however that might be, according to the Holy Quran, Allah then spoke to Yahya as follows. Allah said to Yahya, Ya Yahya khuzil kitaba bekuwa. In other words, O Yahya, take hold of the book with strength. This is chapter 19, verse 12. And then that same verse goes on to say in the Holy Quran, and we granted him wisdom when he was a child, and kind-heartedness from us, and purity. And he was dutiful and kindly to his parents, and was not insolent or disobedient. Chapter 19, verses 12 to 14. Now here when it says, Ya Yahya khuzil kitaba bekuwa, that, O Yahya, take hold of the book with strength. Taking hold of the book with strength or firmly means to act upon its teachings with determination and firm resolve. And this applies to all of us, that we should adhere to the Holy Quran with all our strength. And lastly, I want to point out that as it also says in this verse, which I've just read, Yahya was given wisdom while still a child. And this shows that being of a young age is no bar, is no restriction to having wisdom and knowledge, even though we think generally that wisdom comes with old age, and wisdom is the preserve and exclusively for the older people. That is the common idea. So may Allah enable us to take the opportunity to acquire knowledge and serve his religion, and to realize that being a woman or being a young girl or being a young boy, none of that should hold us back. None of that should hold any person back. So may Allah enable us to take that opportunity. Ameen. Barakallahu lana wa lakum fil Quran al-Azim. Wa nafa'na wa iyyakum bil ayati wa zikril hakim. Innahu ta'ala jawadun karimun malikum barurufur rahim.